that's interesting because we know that the Egyptians had boats.
Yeah.
And so, if there were boats 4,500 years ago, why do we think that they didn't try them out in the ocean? That doesn't make any sense, especially if they existed 1,000 years prior, which is also possible.
Archaeologists wouldn't argue that the Egyptians had boats, but that is still within the framework of accepted history. It's the notion of a global navigating culture in the Ice Age that archaeologists can't swallow. It's a subject that I've kept on coming up against over a number of years. I think the best evidence for it is ancient maps, which show the world as it looked during the last ice age. I first explored this in Fingerprints of the Gods, and I've touched on the mystery again, and I have an appendix on the subject in this book, because I think these are very important. We're talking about maps that were drawn roughly between the 1300s and the 1700s. In other words, in relatively recent history. However, these maps were largely based on much older source maps, which they copied. And we can say that for sure, because one of the famous maps is the Piri Reis map, which was created by a Turkish admiral called Piri Reis in the year 1513. Actually, only a corner of his map has survived. It was originally a world map. We now just have a bit that shows the east coast of South America and North America and the west coast of Africa. Piri Reis writes in that map that it is in his own handwriting that he based it on more than 100 older source maps, some of which had come from the Library of Alexandria. In other words, that maps had been, when the Library of Alexandria had been destroyed in the 4th century AD or whenever it was, some of its contents had been rescued and brought to Constantinople, which became the Turkish capital. And Piri Reis had access to those maps, and he incorporated information from those maps on his maps, as well as incorporating more recent navigational information. And this is one of a whole category of maps which are extremely hard to explain. All of them based on older source maps, now lost, all of them incorporating extremely precise relative longitudes and latitudes. Latitude is not that difficult a technological feat, but longitude is a difficult technological feat. Longitude involves a chronometer. It involves knowing the time at the place you began your voyage and the local noon as well, and calculating the difference between them. You need a chronometer that will keep accurate time at sea with the motions of a ship. And it's just a plain fact that our civilization did not invent such a chronometer until the late 18th century. Before that, we didn't know what longitude we were at, and ships were constantly sailing unexpectedly into coastlines that they thought were hundreds of miles further away. So the discovery of the technique to do longitude was a major civilizational advance. Its presence in maps based on much older source maps that actually show the world as it looks during the last ice age suggests that somebody during the last ice age was mapping the world and had mastered the technique of calculating longitude. Classic example of these maps, and I make a point of this, is what's called the Pinkerton World Map, which was drawn in the year 1818, and it was based on the latest navigational information at that time. I reproduced that map in the book. What's missing from the map, entirely missing, is Antarctica. There's just a hole at the bottom of the world. There's nothing there. And the reason there's nothing there, there's another Pinkerton map that shows that. The reason that you'll need to find one that's centered on Antarctica. The reason that Antarctica is not there is that our civilization hadn't discovered Antarctica in 1818. Oh. So they couldn't authentically put it on a map in 1818. Actually, we discovered it in 1819, and that's when it starts appearing on modern maps. The problem is that Antarctica appears repeatedly on these much older maps, and it appears in the right place and a bit bigger than it is today, but very much as it looked during the last ice age. So what all of this suggests to me is that the world was mapped and explored by a global seafaring culture with a level of technology that was at least equivalent to ours at the end of the 18th century during the ice age.